Welcome to the Daily Dawg. Today is Monday, December 1st. It is week 15 of the 2025 college football season, and Georgia has another game to play. We've been saying all year that we have to be thankful for the 12 regular season games that we get. Those are the guarantees. We get 12 games to enjoy our Georgia Bulldogs playing and come together and talk about it and ooh and ah or cry in disappointment, whatever the results would be. And so here we have another big victory over the hated Bees from the North Avenue Trade School. Yet again, Georgia has beaten Georgia Tech, and that makes a lot of different ways you can look at it. But for one thing, it's 8 in a row. So in an important historical step, Georgia has stepped forward and beaten Georgia Tech for eight times in a row, which means it ties in the series. Tech had the record in the series for having won 8 times in a row, and Georgia has now tied that record. So that's no longer a historical record that Georgia Tech has over Georgia. Let me just pause for a second and say we're back to our quarter system today. So this is the first quarter of today's Daily Dawg, episode number 52. Also, again, the Monday, December 1st episode. So first quarter, we're just going to do reactions and to the Tech game. To the big rivalry game, Clean Old Fashioned Hate, played on Friday this time instead of Saturday. And so we're going to just go through some reactions to that. So first and foremost, congratulations, Georgia. Congratulations, fans of Georgia. Like I said, another victory over Tech. And this also completes a season in which we have beaten all of our major traditional rivals. So, and by traditional, I'm going ahead and including Tennessee in that. Even though Tennessee was not a major rival of Georgia's really until Georgia and Tennessee were forced to play every year when the conference split into 2 parts back in 1992. And we started the SEC championship game. And that's when Tennessee was able to go on a roll and win 9 in a row. And that pretty much stoked the fires of the rivalry for me and for many Georgia fans. And so we've talked about that a lot, though, extensively. But we beat Tennessee, and that was the 9th time in a row we've beaten Tennessee. And so, again, we equaled that record this year where Tennessee had beaten us 9 times in a row. We beat Auburn for the 8th time in a row. We beat Florida for the 5th time in a row. And that's the first time we've managed to beat Florida 5 in a row since the 1970s and 80s. So that was an exciting venture. And then I don't think I'm going to throw this in. Texas is certainly not a traditional Georgia rival. We had barely played. This is only the 8th game, but we evened up the series with Texas, now 4-4 all time, the record with Texas, and we've beaten Texas 3 in a row since they joined the conference. We had the joy of playing them twice last year, beat them, and we beat them again this year. So now you get to the Georgia Tech game, and we've won that 8 in a row. So these are really, just no matter what happens from here, SEC championship, playoff victories or not, this is another great and successful season. So it's a good time to take a moment and just celebrate that and be excited about it. We're 11-1. It's another 11-win regular season. This is something that Georgia is doing with somewhat regularity. Kirby Smart has won, I think I read this the other day, every season since 2017, Kirby's second season, Georgia has won 11 or more games, except for, of course, also the COVID era season. But we only had 10 games scheduled. So I guess we could have won 11 had we made the playoff or the SEC championship game and won virtually all of our games, but it was a shortened season. So we're discounting that one and we're not concerned about it. We're saying, look, pretty much every season other than that COVID season, after starting with Kirby's second year, team has won 11 in a row. And you compare that to Ole Miss. Just won 11 games in their regular season for the first time in the history of the program. So big difference when you talk about history of programs. That's some context to this idea I'm always looking at about the history of our program and where do we stack and rank. And these are things that, again, just as a fan, I just think it's fun to keep track of. It's bragging rights. It's something to talk about. It's knowing the history of your team and this sort of group, this family, this extended connection that we all have together by being either alums or fans or both of Georgia and Georgia football. And so we get to go back and look through the history, something we can pass down. My children get to revel as as fans of Georgia football, and not all of them are as excited about Georgia football as I am, but they do. Some of them do take some pride in that history and enjoy learning it. So something we can hand down and talk about. And so here we are at the end of another season, having beaten Georgia Tech in this year's edition of Clean Old Fashioned Hate. What I'm reminding everybody is the official 117th version of the game, a much played rivalry, an old historical rival. And Georgia Tech is one of the great teams in the history of college football, as we've been talking about. And they've been on hard times in recent years. In this win, I was just pointing out that we recently, that we'd won 8 in a row. Also, along with 8 in a row, there's other things you can look at there. We've won 9 of the last 10. And what did I say here? Then there was 9 of the last 10, and then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 of the last 17. I could go on. I mentioned that since I stepped foot on campus as a freshman in 1989, that we were 27-8. Georgia was against Georgia Tech coming into this game. So now 28-8 in the last 36 games. So that's another way of looking at it. 28 of their last 36 against Georgia Tech. So some might think that would dissipate this rivalry a little bit, or take some of the clean old-fashioned hate, some of the hate out of the clean old-fashioned hate. But I don't think so. I think it certainly continues to stoke the fires for Georgia Tech and on their side of it. Brent Key obviously has a lot of passion. And like I said, I remember, or he remembers, an era, and he was part of an era where Tech won 3 out of 4. And he was on a team that won 3 straight against Georgia, and those teams were able to be ranked in the top 25 each year. And so, that was a good era for Tech. And by all accounts, it looks like Brent Key is moving Georgia Tech back into that direction. And look, they played a tough game. Congratulations to them. I know that Brent Key, I'm sure, again, we're not buddies. I've never spoken, but I am sure he would agree heartily that he takes no solace in moral victories. Obviously, they were just this close last year, having led the game until the end when we tied it up. Then it goes to 8 overtimes, and they lost, and that was a heartbreaker for them. This year, while the game had a final, it did end up within a 1-score game, which I did not think was likely. I said I thought it'd be a 2-score game or better. I actually thought we had a good chance for a blowout here. And for a while, we were close. It looked like it could happen. But this was a game that I think Georgia controlled all the way through the game. I think if you watched it, you were there, or watched it on TV, listened to it on the radio, I think you felt like we were always in control of this game from the get-go. But we were never able to really pull away or drop the hammer. We got up by 10 points. Tech closed it down a little bit. We keep being up by 10 points. 10 points was the biggest gap we were able to open up, and Tech was able to make it a 1-score game. And ultimately, Tech had the ball with a chance to tie it up or go for 2 and take the win. But it was never a very good chance. They did better than you would think. They got the ball back with 14 seconds to play deep in their territory, and you thought there's no way they're even going to get a playoff. But they did get a sideline pass right next to the sideline that got him in range to where Haynes King could get the ball in the end zone. Kudos to the Georgia defense. They did a great job, and a couple of offensive players were back there on defense in the end zone. Everybody was obviously well coached on what to do in that game. They batted the ball down. They did not try to catch the ball. And I can remember seeing several games. I remember one big game against Auburn against Florida State that was played probably back in either the 80s or 90s. And I remember watching it. And honestly, I don't remember now which team won and which team didn't. I think that Florida or Auburn won the game, but in twice Florida State players, whichever one it was, there were 2 plays late in the game where there was basically balls are going sort of deep balls into the end zone where the defender went up for the ball on 4th down and went to try to catch it instead of just knocking it down. And in both instances, the ball went through their hands, was caught by the other team, and they scored. So it's always been impressed upon me. I remember seeing this game way back in the 80s and 90s that you have to knock that ball down. Of course, it doesn't matter because I've never played in one of these games, so all that great mental coaching on my part didn't help out. So it was not the Georgia offense's finest game, but I did talk about coming into the game. I expected the Georgia defense to be very successful against Georgia Tech, even though they were one of the top 10 offenses in the country. And they are not one of the top 10 offenses in the country anymore. They've dropped down into the teens thanks to the Georgia defense, which held Tech to 250 yards of total offense. Haynes King was only 19 of 27 passing for 181 yards. And an interception, no touchdowns. Georgia Tech did not score a touchdown in the game. And so Georgia Tech was one of the top 20, 30 scoring teams in the country, one of the top 10 teams in the country in terms of total offense. And in this game, they were held significantly below their average. Tech had been recently averaging almost 500 yards a game. And so 250 yards, basically they were held to half their average. Haynes King also only ran the ball for 39 yards. He's had 4 games this year where he ran the ball for over 100 yards. So, and of course, everybody can remember that Haynes King had an amazing game against Georgia last year, which helped them get to that 8 overtime thriller. He had over 400 yards of total offense running and throwing. So nothing near that this time. So the Georgia defense really stepped up. They got pressure on them. They kept Tech off balance and helped what appeared and felt like a game in which Georgia controlled the game all along, but a frustrating game because Georgia was never able to capitalize on that sense of control and go ahead and put the game away. And, you know, I say control, there's some other stats that kind of back that up. While Georgia only outgained Georgia Tech by 10 yards. Georgia only gained 260 yards in the game. Georgia did accumulate 19 first downs. They held Tech to 4 of 11 on third down. Tech had 14 third downs. Georgia possessed the ball nearly over 35 minutes in the game, so Georgia continued its dominance of possessing the ball and controlling the ball in that way. Turnovers were even. Each team had 1. Both quarterbacks threw an interception. And so it felt like a sloppy game, a little bit of an ugly game. Georgia, by holding the ball as long as Georgia did and emphasizing the run, Georgia did another thing that it's been doing a lot of times when it's controlled the games, which is it actually lessened the game in terms of drives. Georgia had 9 drives in the game, and Georgia Tech had 10. I think it's 10. Let me just look at something real quick, because actually they only had 9 true drives in the game because their 10th, one of their drives was just basically a one-play kneel and go to the half when they were trailing in the half after Georgia scored a field goal just before the half. So I would say that so both teams only had 9 drives in the game, and I've said this all throughout the season that it's not atypical in college football in recent years to see teams get 10, 12, 13, 15 drives in a game. But when you run the ball, keep the clock moving, and possess the ball like Georgia did, a lot of times the clock moves pretty fast, game goes by pretty quick, and you don't see as many drives. And that's been working for Georgia a lot of the year because they have been able to keep control of the game, but we've also been very efficient when it comes to scoring. We have been very good in the red zone. We've scored a lot of touchdowns, and we've generally not settled for that many field goals. Coming into the game, I made the point that Peyton Woodring had only had 13 field goal attempts on the season compared to Tech's kicker having 25. So literally they kicked almost twice as many field goals, or just under twice as many field goals, even though they'd put up more offense on the season than Georgia had. And that's one of the reasons why both teams were averaging very close to each other, about 33, 34 points a game coming into the game. So in this game, Georgia slowed the game down, controlled it. Both teams only had 9 drives. Georgia scored on 4 of their 9 drives, which is a little below average, but pretty decent efficiency. And Tech was held to 3 of 9, which is what you want to see. You want to create some separation there. But there's very little separation in this game because unlike what I had thought might happen and what Georgia has been able to do throughout the season, Georgia did not capitalize on as many touchdowns, actually only having 1 touchdown in the game, the only touchdown in the game by either team, and settling for 3 field goals of the 4 scoring drives. So had Georgia flipped the script and done what they normally do in a game, which would have been maybe to score 3 touchdowns and 1 field goal out of 4 scoring drives, then this game could have been 24-9, which still wouldn't have felt like a butt whipping necessarily on the scoreboard, but it would have felt a little more like what I think the game felt like when we were watching it. But the game did move by pretty quickly, especially at the half. Even the commentators noted that, like, wow, this game seemed to go pretty quick. And it did. And like I said, Georgia, I think, was largely in control for the whole game, but I think a lot of us were frustrated with how that played out. So we're going to call that on the fourth quarter, or on the first quarter here, as we do our immediate reactions, starting a little bit of breakdown of the game. We're going to stop here for a second, take a break, and then we'll come back with quarter number 2, where we'll dig a little bit more into some of the details of the game. And then as we head towards quarter 3, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about what it means that we've got another game this week. So this is going to be a full game week preparation and getting ready for the big game against Alabama, the SEC championship game. And then we might take a quick look about what's going on just around the conference and around the country and the other SEC championship games and what that'll mean about the playoffs. So thank you for joining us for the Daily Dog, episode number 52, and here on Monday, December 1st. And until we pick it up here in the second quarter, go Dogs. Welcome back to quarter number 2 of the Daily Dog. This is episode 52, Monday, December 1st episode of the Daily Dog, and we are in quarter 2. In quarter 2, we are picking up where quarter 1 left off, which is reactions and commentary and initial breakdown on the game against Georgia Tech from Friday. Again, we're excited to revel in the fact that we've won 8 straight now against the hated Bees from the North Avenue Trade School. And we were just going over the idea at the end of quarter 1 about how this game felt as if Georgia controlled the game throughout the game, and they did. Some of those key stats we look at, they outgained them just barely. That's not really an impressive stat in this game. They only outgained Tech by 10 yards, 260 to 250, but they did have more first downs, 19 to 14. They did possess the ball over 25 minutes in the game. And we had a better third down conversion. Well, I don't know if we did actually or not. Let me look at that real quick. We were 6 of 14, which is just under 43%, and they were 4 of 11, which is 36%. So Georgia was able to kind of play to its strengths. Normally we get about 46%, 47% first third down conversions while holding the other team, and we've been dropping this down. Early in the season, we were giving up over 40%. But we'd been able to push that down into the 30s as the opponent's third down conversion ratio. So Tech is a team that actually was gaining more like 47, 49% third down conversions on the season. So again, these are all areas where we held Tech under their averages. We kept Haynes King in check, a guy who went off for over 400 yards against us in offense and pretty much led the way to making that such a crucial game last year. I mean, not a crucial game, but such a close game. I mean, it was crucial, but so, it's Georgia was able to do a lot more, and I thought Georgia defense would continue its trend and its resurrection. What I also said coming into this game, when I gave my final predictions, is I said that I thought that Georgia offense, that Tech's defense had been playing horrifically, averaging giving up over 560 yards a game in its last 3 games, including giving up over 500 yards of offense to Boston College, who's more or less a bad offensive team. And so Georgia's offense has been consistent all year, while not always flashy and dynamic. They have done a really good job on the season of grinding out on time of possession, first downs, running the ball, and just continuing keeping the ball moving. So The offense had been something I'd really come to rely on. I think we'd all become a big believer in Gunnar Stockton. He's proved to be clutch, dynamic, a real warrior out there, and just the heart and soul of a team that had really, in many cases, been led by the offense. The offense had been the part of the team that had to really do extra work to overcome some deficiencies as the defense was kind of learning and feeling its way into this season. Think of the Ole Miss game with eight straight scoring drives. Think of the Tennessee game and the way the offense had to match Tennessee blow for blow until eventually we could create a little separation, only to have Tennessee tie the game up and put us back into overtime. But then our offense took care of business in overtime, and the defense created just enough separation. And that had kind of been the MO early in the year. Just enough separation from the defense, an excellent performance from the offense, and able to win games, all except for the game against Alabama. And now we're going to be back to talking about that a lot more because what are we going to do? We're going to play Alabama again. So, of course, that is not a direct result of winning or losing this game. Winning or losing this game wouldn't have changed anything about that. But the fact that Georgia was already in the clubhouse at 7-1, turns out 7-1 is the top record in the conference. So Georgia's actually I believe coming into this game, well, I guess Alabama is also 7-1, so and had beaten Georgia. So I guess Alabama is the top seed in this matchup, and Georgia's the second seed in the matchup. Hadn't really stopped to think about that yet, but and this is of course because Texas, a team that we handled quite well, and just really our biggest victory in the 3 games that we played against Texas in the last 13 months. Our biggest victory was actually this last one, 35-10. But Texas had won and played well in the games before the game against Georgia and has played well in the games since then. They beat Arkansas, putting up over 50 points. While the defense gave up some yards, they still played pretty well offensively. And then they came back and had a big second half. Arch Manning looked lost against Texas A&M in the first half, but came back to lead a big charge in the second half where they outscored Texas A&M 24-7 and won 27-17. So we'll get back to that and talk about that a little bit more. But again, it continues to reflect well on the fact that the Georgia defense has really been playing well against teams that are doing well when they're not playing Georgia. So suddenly the numbers and the way the game is going looks a little different. And as it turns out, really for the first time all year, the Georgia defense is the part of the team that really carries the game here. Certainly, we got to give credit to special teams. Peyton Woodring had a big game, nailing all 3 field goals he was asked to kick, including a 50-yarder, and every one of them proved to be necessary. And overall, it was. Tech made mistakes. Their kicker also made all 3 field goals that they got him a chance to kick, but Tech did make mistakes on special teams, which cost them, especially noting right at the beginning of the game where the kick returner goes to fair catch the ball and loses control of it and then picks it up and steps out of bounds at the 3-yard line. And that should have paid off more dividends. I will never be convinced. I actually haven't had a chance to see a good replay of it yet. I have tried to rewatch some parts of the game a little bit and get a little more perspective coming into this show for today, but I have not seen a good replay of that first drive that Tech had where we got to Haynes King in the end zone and he was going down and releases the ball. But by any measure I can see, that should have been grounding. And especially the way I've seen grounding consistently called against us, seemingly out of nowhere. Sometimes when we threw the ball, over the head of a receiver downfield beyond the line of scrimmage, that ball bounced. Haynes King was clearly going down. He dropped straight back. And I'm always a little fuzzy about this too. There seems to be a strange interpretation to me about what's considered out of the pocket when you're able to throw away the ball out of the pocket. He did not seem to veer left or right or get outside of I think of the pocket as being within the, if not in between the hashes, it's at least in between the tackles, right? Or in between the ends of your offensive line. Like that's sort of the tackle box. And when you stay behind in that situation, you're in the pocket. If you move outside of that, then you're outside the pocket. And it seems to me the pocket goes back or should go back a fairly good distance. You don't just get to say, oh, well, he's, ended up 9 steps back and now he's out of the pocket instead of 7. So he did not seemingly, without seeing the replay, he did not seemingly to me veer left or right. He simply went straight back, had pressure right on him, and he just throws the ball sort of sidearmed into the ground. The ball hits the ground 1 to 3 yards deep in the end zone, meaning that it was clearly behind the line of scrimmage, because if the line of scrimmage was in the end zone, then it would already have been a safety. So that ball doesn't get past the line of scrimmage, and the only justification seems to be the idea that there was a receiver in the area. The running back had pulled out of the play, and because they were against the goal line, the running back had never attempted to go out for a pass or take the ball or run the ball. He was purely a blocker. He pulled up and was blocking the entire time, never looked back, and was never looking for the ball. Now, again, by rule, I don't know that means. I really don't know the rule well enough to know whether, if somebody's engaged as a blocker and you throw the ball to him in their direction or not, does that change? He was an eligible receiver, I guess. So, but he was not acting like an eligible receiver. He did not make himself open. He wasn't looking for the ball. He never saw the ball. And the ball didn't get arguably that close to him. And especially if you're grading it on a curve of distance, meaning like if I throw the ball 40 yards downfield and the ball's 8 yards away from him, I'd say, well, that was pretty close. I just missed, and so, or that might be the question. I wasn't throwing it away. Or if there's a guy down the sideline, I throw it 6 yards out of bounds in front of him, 6 yards out of bounds. Is that close enough to be, in the area or not? So in this case, this ball traveled about 8 feet in the air. And so it landed at least 7 or 8 feet away from the quote unquote intended receiver, if you're calling the running back who wasn't looking for the ball and was blocking a receiver, which he was not acting like a receiver. So again, the main thing to me is Haynes King goes straight back. He's under tremendous pressure. As he's going down, he sidearms the ball into the ground, basically behind the line of scrimmage and in the end zone. And so I just don't see any way in which you can say that wasn't grounding. So that should have been a safety, 2 points, and a free kick from there, and Georgia getting the ball going the other way. And that might have changed some things about how the complexion of that game went. Ultimately, Georgia Tech is able to score first, even though this was they got the ball first in that situation. This was their third play of the game. They get out of the next play, as you might remember. They on third down, they get out of it with a 30-yard pass. The drive stalls and they're forced to kick, but by the time they punt us deep into our side of the field. We have to punt after a short drive, and I'm not even sure. Let me see. I'll look. I don't know if we gained any yards at all on that drive, but let me see. Actually, our very first drive was the one where we threw the interception. So we were moving. We had run 8 plays. We had moved about 22 yards and threw the interception, which allowed Georgia Tech to get the ball on our side of the field, and then they were able to get the field goal. So, but again, all of that spins off the fact that they were able to get off of their goal line, punt the ball deep onto our side of the field so that we were playing on our side of the field when the interception happens, allowing them to ultimately score. And another way in which I would argue, looking at how the game flowed, that Georgia controlled the game, because some people might scoff at that. You may say, how can you say Georgia controlled the game? Never up by more than 10. Tech was always a threat. Tech, got within one score a couple times, including it was a one-score game. I mentioned, of course, we out first down them. I mentioned we out possessed them. I mentioned, and I mentioned that some of it is a feeling. It just felt like Georgia controlled the game, and part of that's because Georgia had the ball the whole time. It felt like, but one of the things I'd say I noted even during the game, Tech gets that last field goal. They score their last points on a field goal in the fourth quarter, about halfway through the fourth quarter, making it a one-score game again. Up to that point, they only had the 2 field goals. And both of the field goals that they scored came on short fields. They did not even drive to get the field goal. I mean, a lot of times you drive and you have to settle for the field goal, but neither of their drives or neither of their field goals came off of drives. The first field goal, as I just mentioned, came from getting the interception. So they started with the ball at the Georgia 38-yard line after the interception. So they drive 7 plays, 24 yards, and they kick the field goal. And then their second field goal of the game comes after Georgia had to punt and gave them a short field again. And they drive 6 plays, 27 yards for the second field goal that made it 13-6 after we'd been up 13-3 since the half, honestly. So So this is, the only 6 points they scored in the game, and they'll ultimately only get the 3 field goals. They'll only score 9 points in the game. So 2/3 of the points they scored in the game, or 6 of their 9 points, came on 2 drives that totaled 51 yards. So if we had not helped them in both of those instances, it's not clear they could have even driven into position to score even the field goals. We obviously had to give them a lot of help. But despite the turnover and despite the short field, again, the reason that they are able to get that second field goal is because we were just not playing well on offense. This was a terrible offensive game. Georgia gets the ball in that drive at our own 4-yard line. So that was after the amazing interception by Ellis Robinson. So he intercepts the ball down at the 4-yard line. A stunning play by him. Often compared already. I've seen multiple videos and it really does look and remind you just of the play that Malachi Starks made against Oregon in his freshman debut a few years ago when Georgia just destroyed Oregon in the first game of the year. Very similar looking game, and just again a highlight reel play, this time from the defense, where most of the season we've seen those from the offense. So, but Georgia has to start deep in its own territory, having let Tech drive a little bit, but ultimately getting the field goal, or not the field goal, getting the interception on the long pass. And Georgia's not able to get out of its own way, though, unfortunately. Despite the exciting turnover, we're not able to do anything with it. We have some penalties, incompletions, bad plays that result in loss. Next thing you know, we're at 4th and 20, and we're punting from our own 8. So we only get 4 net yards from where Robinson intercepts the ball. And having to punt from our own 8, have a decent punt, 45 yards, but still Georgia Tech gets the ball at the 47. So from the 47, they only have to drive 27 yards to get the field goal. Still is a pretty, it's a 44-yard field goal. Their kicker's a good kicker, Groza Award finalist this season. I was a little disappointed to hear that and think about the fact that I guess those awards have already, been moving forward into the season. And obviously Peyton Woodring is not one of the finalists, so which is a little bit of a shame. But again, I think it comes back to what I said earlier. Most likely is they just haven't seen him have to be a main weapon in the season. The offense has done such a good job generally of scoring touchdowns. He's only had 13 field goals on the year. He's 12 of 13, excellent percentage, only missed 1 field goal on the season, had a couple 50-yarders, but is left out of that Groza Award consideration, I guess, because his team hasn't asked him to kick a bazillion field goals this year. So, all right. So that gets us a little deeper into the breakdown of the Tech game. We're now at the end of quarter 2. So we're going to step away, take a quick break, and we'll come back. And I think we've got a little bit more to say about the Tech game before we start to look ahead and preview a little bit about the big SEC championship game coming up against Alabama, which probably means we'll save reactions and discussions about the other teams in college football and what's going on out there for our next podcast. Going to try to do a minimum of 3 podcasts this week, maybe 4 or 5, because it is such a big week. I thought it was going to be a slower week. I was really honestly anticipating that we would not make the SEC championship game, kind of envisioned A&M and Alabama winning out and us missing that. And so all of a sudden now it's a much busier week. But this is the end of episode 52, quarter 2. We'll be back in just a moment for quarter number 3. And until we come back to then, go Dogs. Welcome back to the Daily Dog. This is episode 52. This is Monday, December 1st, and this is quarter number 3 of the episode 52 Daily Dawg podcast. We are in the middle of breaking down the Tech game and having our reactions to our big victory, our number 8 in a row over our hated rivals, Georgia Tech, and just the excitement and the enthusiasm that we also are going into game week 15 or week 15 of the 2025 college football season. And a little bit to our surprise, we got a game to play. Again, being the SEC championship game against Alabama. That doesn't particularly have anything to do with the fact that we beat Georgia Tech, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So our theme so far through quarter 1, quarter 2, as we're reacting to the game and talking about the game against Georgia Tech, is that number 1, excited to win. 8 in a row, corrects a history deficiency that we had in one place where we were actually deficient against Georgia Tech, though we've largely owned this series with a now 73, 39-5 record in the 117 official meetings of this game. People will tell you there's been 119 of them, but as I said in the podcast prior to the Friday game, that's counting 2 games in which Georgia did not field a varsity team but played an exhibition during World War II era. So our team was over on the other side of the world fighting the war, and we had some guys volunteer to go out there and play. But they were not a varsity team, and Georgia did not recognize them as a varsity team. So anyway, we continue to own this series. We've now won 28 of the last 36, which dates back to my time stepping on campus as a freshman. And I have a perspective that maybe everybody doesn't. Though there's only been 8 losses since I started as a freshman at Georgia, in the Georgia Tech series, I started out watching us lose the first 2 games that I was a part of. Very first game I got to experience, the Georgia Tech game, was in Atlanta. And I think I was telling you, Rodney Hampton, that was in the era of great defense and great running backs, was the core of the Georgia team. And Rodney Hampton was our running back, and he had already had a phenomenal game earlier in the season. We talked about how he beat Florida almost single-handedly. We beat a higher-ranked Florida team that had Emmitt Smith on it, but he outplayed Emmitt Smith on the day, although I think Emmitt Smith might have had a good day. And Georgia won 17-10 against Florida that year. But this was Ray Goff's first season, which was an era of extreme mediocrity, and we went 6-6 on the season, including finishing the regular season by losing to Georgia Tech in Atlanta at Bobby Dodd Stadium, something that hasn't happened much for most of you to know or remember about. But Hampton got hurt they had the world's worst, cheap, terrible AstroTurf back in those days, the old-fashioned, just like thin carpet that's green carpet over concrete. And Hampton got his ankle twisted or stuck on that terrible concrete. You couldn't even wear cleats. You had to wear turf shoes, if anybody remember those, which were sort of like fake little cleat type shoes that had just little rubber nubs on the bottom to try to get grip. And one of 2 things almost always happened. You were either slipping all over the place, especially if there was any moisture at all, and it was like playing on ice, or your cleats would actually be too grippy and they would stick to that carpet, and people would twist their knees and ankles all the time on that. Not to mention being tackled on that. It was they had no real padding underneath that stuff, so it was basically just being tackled onto a concrete surface with again a small layer of green carpet over the top of it. So that was Georgia Tech's. Playing surface. And one of the things I was always impressed by, just as a side note in the series and the history of this, when I first got to campus, we had an artificial turf practice field, just one. And to my understanding, I asked about it. It was installed because we wanted to make sure that our team, every year when we had to go play Georgia Tech, was prepared to play on that crappy artificial turf. So there was a few other teams that had artificial turf. Neyland Stadium had artificial turf back in the 80s and into the 90s. In Alabama, when they were still playing games in both Birmingham and Tuscaloosa. I know in Birmingham they had artificial turf. I don't know if they ever had artificial turf in Tuscaloosa or not. I really don't remember. But they definitely had artificial turf in Birmingham. And in those days, Alabama played half their home games in Birmingham and half in Tuscaloosa. So there were some other teams that we would play in the SEC that had turf, but Georgia Tech was the main reason that it was told to me that we had an AstroTurf field out there at the and of course when you say that, you're like, well, we have turf fields. Yes, nowadays it's common that teams have the field turf, which of course is the long bladed grass simulant type thing with the plastic grass type thing, and then they fill in most of the time. In the last few years, it's been, I think they've come up with a new item, but it was ground tire rubber to simulate dirt, and it is. The material looks great. It looks like grass. It looks like some of the best looking grass because the color is always rich and deep, and you're able to paint it and do whatever and put your lines and stuff on it, and it works well. You can wear cleats because of the thick rubber, and of course it's much softer and it feels more like being tackled onto turf. So field turf is a very excellent solution in the modern era, and of course we have some field turf fields, I think, out there. But the practice field with the AstroTurf was out there for the Georgia Tech so that we could practice every year to make sure that we were ready to play the one game we knew we were going to play on the road every other year against Georgia Tech on AstroTurf, which is what they used to call it back then, AstroTurf, I guess, because it was all space age and new, right? I did like the field turf field. I used to actually be able to get onto that field in the off season. I don't know that you can get anywhere near any of the Georgia practice fields at any time now, but when I was in school, I could get on that field. Although I have to admit, I don't remember if I actually just jumped the fence or you could find that the fences were open at one end or the other of the practice field. I feel like I must have walked in, although I think I can remember jumping the fence one time, but I think that was just because I was too lazy to walk all the way to the far end where the gate was. And I used to go out there with a tee. I had a pretty decent leg, and I fancied myself as an opportunity maybe to try to walk on as a kicker at one point. And so I would go out there on the field, since it was lined and had the field goal uprights, and it had the lines and the hash marks and everything. And I would go out there with 3 or 4 footballs and a tee, and I would set them up, and I would practice kicking field goals on that field. And nobody ever ran me off. And I was able to get away with that a number of times. Eventually, I also realized they actually had a line field and or sometimes there were good lines, and there were field goal uprights at the Lake Herrick intramural fields, and so I would also go out there and kick. Never did actually bother, just as this wide side note goes on, to try out or try to do try out for the team. During that era, we had multiple guys on the team that would go on to be like Peterson and Kenan Parkman and a couple other guys who would go on to be longtime NFL kickers. So I think I saw the writing on the wall, even if I was pretty good or somewhere between pretty good and very good. And I could kick off a tee. I have kicked over 45, 48-yard field goal off a tee. Admittedly, that's nobody rushing at me and everything. I don't know if I ever actually connected at one at 50, but I know I got one in the 47, 48 yard range off a tee off of the practice field. So pretty good kick, for those days. So, but there was really just no point. We had our backup kickers ended up being an NFL pro for like 10 years or more. So I didn't bother. All right, back to the game. Or the point. Point is, we're reveling in beating Georgia Tech for an 8th straight time in a row, and that's 28 out of the last 36. That's 9 out of the last 10. That's, I think, 15 of the last 17. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, and they're all very positive. But we don't want to stop we don't want to lose sight of the idea of reveling in beating our rivals, because as we've been talking about all season, this is one of the things that makes the season special. We don't know if we're going to win the SEC championship. We don't know if we're going to win a playoff game or the national championship. And I hope we do. And I think we have a chance. And we're going to be talking about that a lot in the coming days and podcasts and weeks. But what we do know is that we've beaten most of our major rivals this year. Alabama has crept up to be a bigger rival. And guess what? We're going to get a second crack at them. So we're going to have a chance to beat all of our major rivals if you decide to go ahead and lump Alabama in the major rival category. And we'll get back to that another time. So let's talk about a couple other observations for the game. I've made the point that I think that Georgia largely controlled the game, even though it ended up being a 7-point game. We were up. We got up 13-3 at the half. We were up 13-3 for most of the third quarter. Tech got a field goal late in the third quarter, and then we matched that early in the fourth quarter, so we maintained that 16-6 or that 10-point lead. Eventually, Tech, halfway through the fourth quarter, was able to get the field goal to make it 16-9 or bring it back to a one-score game. Sadly, we were never able to just march the ball down the field and punch the ball in, but I made the point that Tech, at least 2 of their 3 field goals, they managed to only cover 51 yards total on those 2 drives, and that was because the first one they got was after the interception that Gunner threw on our side of the field, and the other one was after we intercepted them at our 4-yard line, failed to move the ball and had to punt out of our own end zone, and they were able to start at midfield, drive a few yards, and get a field goal. So Tech was not able to consistently ever drive the ball. In fact, they only had the one drive for that fourth quarter field goal. That was the only time they drove the ball more than 30 yards at any point in the game. And were able to, well, I say that, the interception they threw, they had driven 31 yards before they threw the interception on the 4-yard line. So they hadn't even driven, let's say, 35 yards in any drive in the game until they got that last of their 3 field goals in the fourth quarter to make it a one-score game. And between Georgia possessing the ball and driving from time to time, but failing to really capitalize on it, that's where it feels like Georgia largely controlled this game. I think the referees, again, blew the call on the sack, what should have been the sack in the end zone for a safety, the calling grounding on the quarterback on Haynes King. I think the defense did an amazing job on Haynes King. We had some big plays. You saw some great sacks, some great pressure, some nice tackles behind the line, the big interception from Ellis Robinson, which was just a highlight reel play. So the defense really continued to come up, and they did. They stepped up in a big way, and they've been playing better and better. And in this game, they played against a very high-level offense. I expected them to play well and help create separation in the game for us. I thought they might, hold Tech to anywhere between 10 and 13 points, maybe give up as many as 17 to 21. But I thought our offense would continue to sort of dominate the day. The offense really didn't show up. They just were never able to quite get out, get in sync. And really, sadly, I think that largely falls on the fact that Gunner just had a really bad day. I think by the second half, Georgia Tech was really fired up. They again, I think, were well coached. They came out in the half and they really played well. In the first half, I think it was more us, though. I mean, listening to the announcers, especially our radio guys, looking at a couple other things people said, it seems like there were routes open. I didn't always be able to see them from the TV, and I did not end up going to the game. I mentioned I might get to go. I did not end up going to the game. So I watched it on TV, listened to the radio broadcast, did some replays, and I'm never able to really get a good picture of what routes are open around the field, but I have good authority from people who do know that there were routes open, and Gunner just wasn't seeing them very well. And then a couple times didn't make very accurate passes. A few of the passes he made were right up against the sideline. You saw, like Dylan Bell had a circus catch that he caught, but he was out of bounds, and it seemed, it was just by just little margins. Noah Thomas tried to fight for a ball, again, coming down out of bounds with the ball, or maybe not even coming down with the ball, but balls that were right up against the line. And Gunner's numbers were pretty terrible. 11 of 21 for 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Had a couple nice plays to Zachariah Branch. Zachariah Branch continues to just be that difference maker. I saw somebody make the comment that he reminds you of Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey in the idea of, like, in emergency break glass and get score or get yardage, and he did. Branch had a couple nice catches that were big momentum shifts, including the touchdown, in which Gunner did a good job making sort of a hot read to throw it quick to Branch, and Branch just makes a guy miss and gets into the end zone, even though the ball was thrown short of the end zone, and that was our only touchdown of the game. Overall, Nate Frazier had another big game running the ball, and in a sort of twist of irony, there was a lot of sense both from the announcers and maybe even some fans, where normally people are complaining, oh my gosh, not another Bobo run up the middle. It's possible we came out throwing the ball in the second half, and I'm sure that there was some thought that said, hey, we ran the ball well in the first half. We got to keep Tech off their heels and see if we can get them with some of the passing game, get the passing game going. But it's possible that this was one of the few times as fans we all would have wanted to see just more running. We had nearly 150 yards of rushing at the first half, and it just felt like there was nothing Tech could do to stop that. The pass game wasn't working very well. Gunner seemed to not be seeing the reads, not seeing the opportunities. In the second half, it didn't get better. He continued missing those opportunities. That helped Tech clamp down on us. And their defense really, I think, stepped it up in the second half, where I think it was more us in the first half. I got to give them credit in the second half. And overall, I got to give them credit across the board, because I just didn't expect a defense that had been giving up over 400 yards a game on the season to come in and play this well against an offense that had been maybe not the most dynamic in football, but one of the most consistent in terms of grinding out yards and points. So my little digression to my story about field goal kicking has kind of used up most of quarter three here without getting as far down to the analysis, but we're going to go ahead and take a quick break for the end. This is the end of quarter three. We're going to come back and wrap up in quarter four, where we'll finish our recap and talk a little bit about the upcoming game with Alabama, which is, we got a lot of content on that this week, so we'll be back with several podcasts this week to break down in every way possible the scenarios for playoff and with Alabama and the upcoming game and what we think is going to happen there. But we'll touch on that just a little bit here in the fourth quarter before we wrap it up today. Thanks for being with us so far. This is episode 52 of the Daily Dawg podcast. This is the end of quarter three, and until we come back in just a few moments in quarter four, go Dogs. Welcome back. This is the fourth quarter of episode 52 of the Daily Dawg, Monday, December 1st. We are recapping and reacting to the Georgia Tech win from Thanksgiving week, from Friday, right after Thanksgiving. And what a nice Thanksgiving treat it is to beat your in-state hated rival for the 8th time in a row, for the 9th out of 10th time, and so on, as we've been saying. So we're recapping the game a little bit, and I'm trying to add some context to the feeling that I had watching the game, that Georgia controlled the game throughout the game, and yet it was just a 7-point game, and we only scored 16 points. It was 16-9. I think at the end, it didn't have that rah-rah, like, woohoo, look at what happened, look at what we did kind of feel, because and I think the main reason is, A, we didn't create that much separation. It only ended up being a one-score game. Tech did end up with the ball late in the game and throwing the ball into our end zone. We had to bat that away to make sure that they didn't have a chance to either tie the game on an extra point or go for the 2-point conversion for the win. So that, of course, is disappointing. We were a 13.5-point favorite coming in. Georgia had been playing really well. We had won our last 3 games by an average of 25, 26 points a game coming in, and that included a beatdown over Texas, who went on to beat Texas A&M and bounce back up into the top 15. So that's looking like a higher quality win, looking good for Georgia now. And Tech, on the other hand, had played not a murderer's row of teams. They played Pitt, who is okay to decent. They played Boston College and NC State, neither of which are good. And Boston College being an offensively challenged team, and yet they put up over 500 yards of offense. So coming in, I thought Georgia had a chance for this to be a blowout. I kind of predicted that maybe this is 38-21, something in that wheelhouse, or 35-17, something like that the Georgia offense would get its 450 yards and 35 points, 32 to 35 points. The Georgia defense would continue its progression on the season of getting better and better, get pressure on Haynes King and limit them maybe as low as 10, 13 points, but maybe 17 to 21. Well, the second part of that happened. The Georgia defense was even better than I thought, held them to 9 points, just 3 field goals. Only 2 of those, they didn't even drive the ball. We had to give them the ball at midfield or our side of the field for them to even get 20 or 30 yards forward to get the field goal. They only had 1 drive from their side of the field to our side of the field with a score in the whole game, and that was late in the fourth quarter. And yet somehow, despite all that, there's a little bit of not a good feeling about the game, that you come away going, well, okay, I'm glad we won, but man, that was tense or closer than I thought it would be. And of course, Tech, as we said, look, they're playing, games don't progress just because Tech uh, was closer to us 2, 3 years ago and overtime last year. That doesn't mean you progress to winning this year. But that had been the case since Brent Key took over. You go back and you just look at the games, and Georgia back in the last full game of Jeff Collins' era, back in the 2021 season. And of course, this was an epically good team, right? A national championship team with an unbelievable defense. But Georgia won that game 45-0. Then the next year, it was still a pretty emphatic win for Georgia. But if I remember the game, and I remember feeling like we never just quite pulled away or throttled them off like you might have thought. Still, the ultimate final score, 37-14. That was the 2022 game. And again, that was a team that went undefeated and won the second of back-to-back national championships. In 2023, a team that goes undefeated in the regular season, the game was only a 31-23 game. And that involved Tech scoring late to pull it within the 8 points and then trying for an onside kick. And, again, inching closer, but still, for a lot of that game, Georgia had a pretty good lead, and Tech pulled close late. And then, of course, last year, Tech started off like a house on fire, and they put us down big in our own stadium. We had to fight back to tie it up to get to overtime, and then the 8 overtime thriller that you remember. So, each one of those games is sort of incrementally moving forward. But football doesn't move incrementally forward year to year because teams change, even if the coaches are the same, and there's a lot of different factors, and you're playing a different team. The team you're playing is a different team. But Georgia continues to be a team that has more talent than Georgia Tech. Georgia continues to be a team that is a little bit more on elite level than Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech's making strides. So, a pair of 7-6 seasons now, even with the loss, as I said, coming into this game, they're 9-3. They have a chance to win their bowl game and go 10-3, get back in the top 25. Even if they don't and they lose a bowl game, they'll be 9-4. Still a 2-game improvement over the previous 2 seasons where they were 7-6. And they were, much more even than their losses. They were competitive, including this game. This game, they only lost by 16-9. And this was surprising, especially surprising result given how badly they had been playing on defense. So, the thing I didn't expect to do was completely shut them down on offense, but them to completely shut us down on offense. And like I said in the third quarter, I think that largely our offense was off because Gunner had a really off night. And a little bit concerned. Gunner's now thrown an interception in 3 straight games. You go back 3 games ago, he was, only had 2 interceptions on the season. Now he's thrown an interception each of the last 3 games. Fortunately, none of those have resulted in losses or been the deciding factor in the game. But in those other games, he was still really good, just the heart and soul of the offense. In this game, Gunner was never good. And that's concerning. I think it's an aberration. I don't think, I'd like to feel more super confident heading into the SEC championship game that, Gunner continues to progress and be better. But his numbers were pretty atrocious, actually. 11 of 21, only 70 yards, a 3.3 yard per completion or yard per attempt average, which is terrible. He did have the 1 touchdown and the 1 interception. He only completed passes to 4 different receivers. Dylan Bell had 2 for 3 yards. Not very much production there. Nate Frazier caught 2 out of the backfield for 5 yards, a long of 4. McCray, also out of the backfield, caught 2 passes for 9 yards, a long of 7 there. And then Zachariah Branch caught 5 passes for 53 yards, a 10.6 average, and the touchdown that we talked about before where he just left somebody standing there wondering what happened to them. He did have a 24-yard reception in the game. That was That was our long play of the game. Nate Frazier had a 22-yard run in the game. And Nate Frazier is definitely the offensive MVP of this game. Zachariah Branch is a close second because his plays were so big. His 24-yard catch was a big first down when we absolutely had to have it. His touchdown was a big play and obviously was a big difference maker in the game, the winning score by all indications, the way the game played out. But Nate Frazier, 16 carries, 108 yards, 6.8 yard average, and that went down in the second half when it became clear that we were just having all kinds of trouble throwing the ball, and they just kept handing the ball off and hoping to get something better of it. At that point, Tech was really stacking the line, and where it seems like we're often in what you call obvious passing situations that make it a little harder on third and long, we were in obvious running situations on first and second down, and it became tough sledding for Josh McCray and Nate Frazier in the second half. Gunner himself had a sort of a Gunner-like day, not a great yard average, but he picked up a couple big first downs and did a decent job running the ball. He had 15 carries for 42 yards. But I think the point where you really this is one of those games that kind of points to sometimes how close these things are, where a game could just as easily turn here or there. The Texas game, 14-10 going into the fourth quarter. Georgia's able to score 21 unanswered, and it's a 35-10 blowout by the time you're done. This game had that potential. Georgia had control of the game. Tech had only scored 3 points on the field goal that they got when they started on our side of the field. Georgia drove the length of the field and ends up settling for a chip shot field goal on their first drive. On their second drive, they get into the end zone with the Zachariah Branch touchdown, and Tech gets the ball back, but the sequence of events comes to be that Georgia gets the ball with 3 or 4 minutes to go. I think it was 2 minutes, something like that, to go in the half. And now you've got that awesome moment that coaches love where you get to do the 2-for-1, right? If you play your cards right, you drive down the length of the field, you score with no time remaining, and then because we'd won the coin toss and elected to defer, we're going to get the ball to start the second half. So you get the ball to start the second half, you can drive down again, you have the opportunity to score a second touchdown. So at this point, it's already 10-3. If Georgia can drive and put a touchdown on the board, they could have made it 17-3. And then if they put a touchdown on the board to start the second half, and we've been able to do this against other opponents with better defenses in the year. So you think this is where Georgia drops the hammer. And so watching the game, you really felt like, okay, this is where we've got control of the game. We got the ball back, a couple minutes just in time to do a 2 to 4 minute drill, score, get the kickoff, come back out. We often come out fired up and doing just house on fire in the third quarter. It's usually a time that Georgia plays really well. So you think, okay, come out here, knife through them, put another touchdown on the board, and we can just pretty much salt this thing away. Before Tech and Haynes King even have a chance to touch the ball again, it can be 24-3. And that's what I really thought would happen. And then when we settled for the field goal to end the first half, I thought, okay, 13-3 at the half. We can still make it 20-3, by getting the ball, come out first. Well, we get the ball, we go 3 and out, and now, and Tech's defense is clearly fired up, and now they're really keying on what we're doing. They made some nice adjustments at the half. Where I think Gunner was off in the first half, I think the Tech defense really starts to be a deciding factor in the second half, and that's something I never saw coming. And so, fortunately, the Georgia defense was ultimately the deciding factor in the game. And, one thing I will say is this is one of those games, and a few people have pointed this out. I think one of the things that really gives me some hope, and this has been a building hope throughout the season, is the idea that, look, good teams find ways to win. Good teams have more than one way to win. It's great when you have one of these high-power offenses and you run up and down the field and you score and you just outscore guys. But when you only have that and that doesn't work for one reason or another, that fails you, then a lot of the times you see a team that doesn't have any way to win. Oklahoma is a team that's made it into the playoff. It looks like they've qualified. They're 10-2. They've got 3 wins against top 25 teams. They look like they've got the resume, but the game against LSU they played this week, it was 17-13, and they failed. I don't even know if they had 250 yards of offense in the game. Maybe they did. I have to go back and look. But they won because they held LSU to under 200 yards of offense in the game. So they're living heavily on their defense. Their offensive numbers are poor. More like, Georgia's an upper third team. After this game, we actually slipped. We were right around 28-26 in terms of yardage gained in points. Now we're back down at like 30-something and 40 in yardage and points, just after only getting 260 yards and only getting 16 points in this game. We really saw our stats slip there. But Oklahoma is a team that's living in the 70s or 80s in their offensive production numbers. And, again, out of 134, 136 teams in FBS, that puts them in the, below the midpoint line, right? They're in the bottom half of all of college football on offense. So it's hard to imagine that they're really going going to be able to advance all the way into a national championship game or win a national championship game because they're so one-dimensional. They're so defensive-oriented. They really don't have a powerful offense. Notre Dame, to me, looked like that same team coming into the playoff. They were able to beat us in a heavily defensive game, as we've talked about a lot last year, and they managed to advance to the game against Ohio State, and they played some good defense in that game for a while. But again, offense never came around. So I think one of the things that we can really take some heart from this is that Georgia is rounding into a team that can beat you with offense. We have won shootouts this year against Tennessee and Ole Miss. We can beat you with defense, and we've been getting better and better. We did it to Texas, and now we've done it to Georgia Tech here. Especially Georgia Tech is a team that had been a high-level offensive team coming in, and we really throttled them. So we didn't have our A game or even our B game or maybe even our C game on our offense, and yet that's okay. We controlled the game and won because our defense was back to the kind of level that you expect. And with this performance, our defense is slowly moving up. They're solidly a top 15 defense, no matter which metrics you look at across the board. In some ways, you could look at it and say they pulled themselves within the top 10 by points and yards allowed. They're 12th and 13th. So, but if you look at time of possession allowed, you look at third downs allowed, and a couple other metrics, you might say that maybe they're actually a top 10 defense. And that's encouraging because people have pointed out no team has won the national championship in the last 4 or 5 years that wasn't an elite defensive team. We'll get more specifics of that as we go through this week and start talking about the SEC championship game and looking ahead to the playoffs. But there has not, Ohio State was an elite defensive team last year. Michigan was an elite defensive team the year before that. Georgia was an elite defensive team the 2 years before that. And then you get back to Alabama, elite defensive team. So, you just continue to see that. And so it's hard to imagine a team that's maybe only a top 30, 35 defense being a team that's going to make the national championship. But Georgia has an offense that can grind out yards and points against anybody, and they've shown that all year. And now you see a defense that's saying they can play with anybody. In fact, be a total shutdown defense, win the game if they have to. So that's one of the biggest, most encouraging things, I think, coming out of this game. I think that covers most of what we want to say. To recap, we're now at we've hit the 15-minute mark in quarter number 4. So I'm just going to take a moment and say, well, there was a timeout, so there's a little extra time on the clock. A timeout or two in there. There wasn't really, but overall, I'm just trying to look at the notes and think about it real quick, what else we can say about Georgia Tech, other than it was a great game. I guess the other thing is interesting that it was in the Dome. I'd love to hear feedback from any of you guys who went to the game and what you had to say. It looks like the atmosphere was pretty good, not as good as I've seen with other neutral site games. And of course, this wasn't really supposed to be a neutral site game. You saw Georgia Tech logo on the field and in the end zones. It's supposed to be a Georgia Tech home game. From the TV perspective, I could see there were Tech fans there. I couldn't really gauge how many. A lot of the people who showed up on TV ended up being the same batch of Tech fans, so it felt like they found a batch and really zeroed in. The way the tickets were distributed, it doesn't really look like there was sort of an obvious Tech section and Georgia section, which I think would be great for a game like this, a la the Red River rivalry or the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, where you can really see where the fans are from each team. I think that there was plenty of Georgia fans there, but I could also see from the TV that there was a lot of open seats, and I know there was tickets still available, even from the entity, not just on resale from the group selling the tickets. There were tickets available right up until kickoff, but they were maintaining pretty high prices. And I wonder if that's also something that happened, is just that the prices were really high. The least expensive ticket that you could buy to get in the nosebleed seats or standing room only was about $160 to $165. And starting in the 200 level, they were in the 200s, 220s, and it went up pretty quickly. I mean, club level seats on the, like above the locker room where Atlanta United goes in, those were over $800. I mean, this was an exciting or interesting game to see, but I just can't imagine paying $800 for a regular season game that doesn't win anybody a championship. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear more feedback about that. So listen, this has been our breakdown and reaction to Georgia Tech. Obviously, we got a lot to talk about in coming days about the game against Alabama. A lot of people had already asked me, would we rather have played Alabama or Ole Miss? I guess it doesn't matter. We're playing Alabama. But I did see those questions coming in. I guess what I'd tell you, if it makes you feel better, is I'd rather have Alabama. Alabama probably feels the same way as what I'm about to say, which is we gain nothing by playing Ole Miss again. We already played Ole Miss and we already beat them. So playing them again just introduces the chance for them to beat us and sort of right that wrong. Whereas we lost Alabama. It's our only loss of the season. It was a close game. We only lost by 3 points. And so we have a chance to look at what we did there and see if we can execute better and bring home a win this time in what figures to be a close game. ESPN's predictive model shows Alabama has like a 51% chance to win and Georgia a 49% chance to win. The early line on the game looks like Vegas has Georgia as about a 1.5 point favorite. We've been favored in all of the recent games against Alabama, so I don't take much comfort in the idea that we're a narrow favorite. It just looks like it's pointing to what it was last time, which is probably a very close game between very evenly matched teams. But I think if we're going to be in this game, then I think this is the best matchup we could have. It would have been fun and interesting to see Texas A&M. That would have required Alabama losing to Auburn, and I don't think Auburn really had that juice for that, but they came closer than we might have thought. And it's nice to see that. I'll say that Alabama seemed to play very much the same game we played. They struggled. They gave up over 400 yards of offense to Auburn, but a couple turnovers doomed Auburn. Alabama was held to under 300 yards of offense, and the pressure really got to Ty Simpson. Their inability to run the ball, Alabama, remained a thing. And so, there's a pattern there that you can see that says this team is beatable. But they pulled out the game. They won it in a close game, a 1 point game. They put more points up than we did, but overall they did not look great playing an overmatched rival. And both teams kind of come into this game a little similar. So yeah, it would have been more interesting to play Texas A&M, maybe even a little more interesting to see Ole Miss in the game. But that's not what happened. We get Alabama, and the good news is that gives us a chance to right the wrong. And the last time we lost to SEC team in the regular season in a championship type season where we got a rematch. You remember the Auburn game where Auburn beat us when we were number one, and then we came back a few weeks later, played them in the SEC championship game and destroyed them. So hopefully that's a pattern that lives on for Georgia football. So we'll talk about that more as the week goes on, but I'm hoping that we'll see that and that'll be but it's probably going to be a close game. Again, those numbers I just told you about, the early predictions, probably pretty close. My gut says it's going to be another close game. I just hope this time improved defense and, except for the Tech game, improved offense and playmakers emerging throughout the season means that this time we can execute a little better. I think Alabama is beatable. And I think we can, it'll do a lot for us. It'll do a lot for this let's put it this way. If we beat Alabama in this game and then springboard into top seed in the playoff, I think the confidence that this team will have, being the first team in a while to beat Alabama and getting that monkey off the back, I think would do wonders and springboard us nicely into the playoffs. So I think this is a great opportunity. I have to admit, I guess the other thing I'll say is, there was a whole discussion, would Georgia rather have been in the game or not? I kept saying leading up to the game that, look, we have to enjoy and look for the opportunity to win SEC championships, win a championship. We don't know for sure what will happen in the playoff, but this is a chance. We got a one-game chance to be a champion again this year as we were a champion last year. And this is we know we got this. And we know by being in this game, especially by winning this game, we control our destiny in the playoff. Even though it seems like we're secure in the playoff, you take matters in your own hands. You go out and win this game and you leave no doubt. So I think this is the right thing. I have to admit, I had come to think it wasn't going to happen, and I was almost a bit disappointed when I heard Texas A&M had won the game. And I just thought, oh, okay. I was kind of looking forward to seeing our team have some rest, have the week off, have a couple weeks off, and see how the whole playoff thing shakes up. But I'm readjusting, and look, this is the right thing, and it's going to be exciting. We need this opportunity to take down Alabama and springboard ourselves into a championship run. And I think this team is good enough to do it. We'll be talking about that more as we go on. So we have gone deep into overtime here in quarter number 4, but I appreciate your patience, and thanks for being with us. That's our breakdown and recap of the Georgia Tech game. We'll dig more into the game against Alabama coming up in the next podcast. which at the latest will be on Wednesday. But with so much content to talk about, maybe we'll do one for Tuesday, or maybe we'll wait until the playoff rankings come out and combine that and some playoff ranking discussion on Tuesday. So keep your eyes out and come back and join us again for the next podcast. Until then, thank you so much for listening. Please share. Please send any comments. Please, just as a reminder, you can tell people to find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube audio or video, or you can find us at thedailydawg.com, where you can see either the audio or the video feeds, and you can leave comments and emails, any way to message us. I hope to hear from you. Thank you so much for those of you who've given some feedback so far, and I hope you have a great start to your week. And how could it be bad knowing that you're playing for an SEC championship and you just finished an 11-1 season, you're number 3 in the country, and you just beat your hated rivals again for the 8th straight time. So think on that, enjoy that, and hopefully that makes your Monday a little bit better. Until next time, go Dogs.